Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to co-moderate this session with Dr. Claudia Simo, who is the head of Applied Research Practice at the Center on Conflict Development and Peace at the Graduate Institute. You have heard a lot about climate change, and this conference is dealing with something extremely important, the link between climate change, peace, and peace building. And this particular session is dealing with the intergenerational dialogue, which is certainly something which, in my view, was not handled properly in the past. So, as I said, we have heard a lot about climate change. Now, the evidence is really overwhelming, and it has impacts on almost all sectors of the society, all economic sectors, environment.
Tous les
Yes.
secteurs économiques.
Sorry. So it has impact on almost all sectors of society. You see these extreme events with an increasing frequency and intensity, the impact on water resources, on refugees, on so many aspects. And it is interesting to note that in 2007, the IPCC received the Peace Nobel Prize precisely for providing information which could help to maintain the peace, because by providing information which helps to realize the security impact of climate change. So there is an increasing perception that we need to do more in this aspect, and I'm very happy that this conference is looking at both sides of the coin. That is, on one side, what is the impact of climate change on the conflict, on the security, but also, can it be used, some of the action against climate change, can it be used as an opportunity to increase cooperation and, in other words, to promote peace in a different way? And I'm coming from a discipline where a similar process happened in the 70s, where it was the height of the tension of the Cold War, and it was a time where USA and USSR decided to agree on how best to exchange meteorological information from space, and actually later it became information from all types of observation to increase cooperation. So sometimes it's a way to use a crisis as an opportunity to handle to promote peace and security. But it's a big challenge. You saw recently that there is not a unanimous agreement about whether the Security Council should deal with that or not at the level of the UN. So this afternoon, let me not take more time. I'm very happy to have an incredible panel of experts to deal with that. It will be divided in two parts. The first part will be moderated by Dr. Seymour, and it will have three panelists, and I will very briefly introduce them. The first panelist will be Alexis Manuela Cagnari Monia, and she belongs to the young generation, of course, and she has a master's student in politics and public administration from Germany, and she had done research on mobilizing inequalities from grievance to conflict. She has been involved in the Women's International League for Freedom and Peace. She's a young rapporteur at the Road to Geneva Young Rapporteurs Program from the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, and she has been also a speaker representative at the IUCN Global Youth Summit. The second panelist we get in this first pass is Gilles Carboniere. Gilles Carboniere is the vice president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. He's also a professor here at the Graduate Institute on Development Economics. His research is focusing on the nexus between natural resources, energy, development, with a special focus on fragile, conflict, and violent context. The third panelist is also a professor at the Graduate Institute. That's Mark Hafti, who is a professor, also a senior researcher at the Center for International Environmental Studies at the IHEID. In the second part, we shall have three other panelists. One of them is Jan Kerel Cabolana Guillermo, who is actually right now working at my former organization, the WMO. Is a youth leader, a staunch advocate for climate change from local to global scales. He was actually in Philippines during the super typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda as it's called as well, which was the strongest typhoon to hit Philippines. That was 2013, I think. He was also a government official who led the Philippine delegation to a number of events, and now is a program management associate at the World Meteorological Organization. He was last year the liaison for the UN Climate Change Conference of Youth in Glasgow. So a lot of experience, despite he also belongs very much to the young generation. The second panelist in the second part will be Maria Paloma Noriega Jalil, and she is an early career climate fellow at the United Framework Convention on Climate Change. And right now she's working with the intergovernmental support to climate negotiation. She has a master in environment, resources, sustainability from actually the Graduate Institute. She has participated in the capstone project with Interpeace and climate change on conflict and peace. She has done lots of things in the field of environment and climate change impact and social conflicts in atoll islands. And she also worked, she has experience with the government. She worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico. She worked also for the International Organization for Migration and for the Convention for Biological Diversity. The last but not least speaker is, and I hope I will pronounce it all right, is Professor Päivi Lujala, who is a professor in Oulu, in University of Oulu in Finland. Is founding NPAC's board member. His recent research has focused on internal climate migration. And in particular, he has led a project of the Research Council of Norway on adaptation to environmental change in Bangladesh. But he has been involved in many other things, what impact people's perception about climate change and their consequences amongst Norwegian. She conducted also extensive research on natural resources and how these impact conflict, peace building, and development more generally. So let me not take more time because I want to leave maximum time for the presentation of the panelists, and if we have enough time for also interaction between them, because let's not forget the title, this is Dialogue. So Dr. Seymour, maybe I will now hand over to you. Thank you.
Gerald, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, and I would like to welcome the panelists who are sharing this 30-minute session with me. Now to turn on your cameras, I see you already, Professor Hafti, Alexis, I think Professor Carboniere. Oh, it's wonderful. So for those of you who are watching us, it's such a joy to be able to be a moderator amongst such caring, committed experts in this field. And I see that we have many tens of you who are joining in and perhaps will be watching the recording. So for me, it's really a great privilege to be here. And we have the next, 30 minutes, 7 minutes each participant to talk about what this nexus between climate change, conflicts, and insecurity actually means. For those of us who are based in Geneva, the word nexus is said often. How often it means something is another question. And so the focus of evidence, what are we really talking about when we are looking at these questions, is really the heart of our discussion together today. So we have a couple of guiding questions that I'm going to just present now at the beginning before we move on to our speakers. And I would like to invite all of you who are listening, who are part of the audience, to enter in either by chat or Q&A. I'm not sure which function you have available, but if I have both, I will monitor both. As you're hearing the expertise and the knowledge and the insights from Mark and Alexis and Jean, go ahead and write them in, and I will do my best to weave them in together. At the end of our two parts, we're going to have sort of an interactive session where we can speak more with each other, I think. But please do feel free. I welcome you to send in any questions or thoughts even that you would like me to read out, because we'll have the last sort of 10 minutes or so to engage with you via me as your moderator. So what we're looking at today specifically with our speakers are, what is the scientific evidence? What is this environment, climate change, and conflict and peace? And then what gaps are there? What gaps exist, and what can each of us be doing to fill those gaps? Because I think after this wonderful Environmental Peacebuilding conference, we know that we all have a role to play in this. And so I think we should leave here today ready and aware and primed on what we need to do right now. So with that, I would like to first open the floor to Alexis. You, as the young rapporteur, as part of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, as a young leader, as a leader, period, of a younger generation, you are really looking at this from a practical, engaged kind of way. You know the scientific evidence, but what are the gaps? What are the gaps that are needed to be filled going forward? The screen and the microphone is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Seymour, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here today in this panel. Well, actually, I would like to start by saying that this association between climate change and conflict and insecurity is particularly really complex. And then first, because as we know, there is no direct causal relation between climate change and conflict. It means that we cannot say that climate change is leading to conflict, but of course it is a really important threat multiplier for because of, particularly in those contexts where we have different complex structural systems. For example, we can think about socioeconomic and political inequalities, where certain groups are excluded from power, for example, or where there are gender-based violence and so on and so forth. So I think these kind of structures are, of course, really already vulnerable. And then we have this factor of climate change, and then it exacerbates this vulnerability. So, and of course, it can lead to conflict, for example, because we can have water scarcity or food insecurity, for example, and then we also see forced migration, and then many other factors. So I think what I want to highlight is that the climate change is affecting all of us, but not equally. So it is important to see how different is in different contexts. For example, if we think about, in the worst case, when we are talking about ongoing conflicts or civil wars, for example, I think as a young generation, we need to try to break this conflict trap that exists nowadays. Like we know that these conflict affected population are already really vulnerable to suffer in the wake of climate-related shocks. So I think we always think about that when we are in this particular context, there are a lot of forced migration, but we need to think about what we should do with this population that remains in the country, because of course, people need to have some resources to migrate. But what happened with these people and young generation that is remaining in these countries, how we can provide them some kind of resources and opportunities, for example, to don't join conflict armed groups, for example, because sometimes they become the only possibility and kind of the only groups that provide them some kind of opportunities. So I think this is a really important point, that to prioritize development assistance and climate change adaptation in these situations. Another thing that I would like to say is, like when we think also about post-conflict societies, they are really fragile already. Also, even if they are not anymore in conflict, they are already really vulnerable. So I think it's important, as again, as young generation, to think about these many opportunities that we have to work in prevention and early warning. I've seen many different how can I say that, different initiatives that work on that with, for example, with technology, with data. And then I think we have a huge opportunity now that we have this technology to create these mechanisms of prevention. I want to just highlight this initiative that is named Water, Peace and Security, that I think it's extremely amazing, and actually it can work as a tool for many governments, international organizations, and so on. So I think this is something really important where we as young can work strongly. Another point is, like, it is really important for me to, as a young, to highlight the importance of not only thinking that human beings are being affected by conflict, but also non-human beings, the whole nature that exists there. And therefore, I think that we need to move from this really anthropocentric vision that we have and move towards a more ecocentrism vision. So try to create our strength more, for example, frameworks to protect environment in these kind of situations. And some days ago, I was participating in a panel related to environmental transitional justice. That was totally amazing for me, because I feel that there are new initiatives that are going on, and then we need to think on the environment as an actor and also as a victim of this conflict. So I think it's really important, and also because these spaces, these nature spaces, are really connected to many communities, particularly indigenous communities, and it's important to be really aware about that and to strengthen these, for example, laws in different countries, but also internationally. And the last point that I would like to highlight is that we need to think a lot about also military expenditure, and how we need, as young people, need to advocate in order to try to strengthen our voice, to reallocate these funds towards, for example, mechanisms of prevention and early warning. And also we know that the military expenditure is like almost $2 trillion per year. This is a source from CIPRI. And it's also emitting a lot of pollution, for example. So I think it is important that we as young people get more involved about it, and to strengthen our voice towards our government to change that, and to share what is happening with that. Thank you.
Alexis, thank you for this eloquent and quite complete picture in exactly the amount of time allotted. Thank you for that. What you have just brought up for all of us to think about is to really see what our role is in this, you know? And so on one hand, here we are, many of us sitting in comfortable capitals where we do have power and advocacy influence to be able to, as you've just closed in saying, advocate against military expenditure or more responsible military expenditure. And I think so much of the work that is done by peace-building actors in general and humanitarian actors as well is working over there. But there is so much that we must do here now today. And it's our obligation, you know? So the sort of malaise and the despair that I feel amongst many, and including amongst young people, actually there's no reason to feel that, because we do have our democratic voices in many cases to be able to act, and it takes the work. CIPRI and Small Arms Survey and other actors have done the research for us. We have the data. So there's no excuse to say it's too big and overwhelming. So that point is really, really important. Thank you for raising that. I see a chat from Mohamed Dweli from Somalia, and thank you for writing in, because here you are, you're making it real. There is drought and there is flooding in Somalia right now, right? So we can't wait So what can we do? Look at the resources that we are all representing here together today. So again, Mohamed Del Dwelly, thank you for raising that to keep us really connected on the urgency and the life of this, life and death of this. Which then brings me to my sort of leading into Professor Carboniere's intervention, because the complexity, and I really like how you talk about those who are left behind. Not the refugees, not the migrants, not the usual beneficiary of our aid. What about them? What do we do? So that's a question mark. Gilles, I don't expect you to answer that, especially given that one of your many hats today with us at least is as Vice President of the ICRC, but these are really important points to be thinking about. So I wonder, Professor Carboniere, if you'd be able to share with us, you're on the front lines, you've been on the front lines of this work for so many decades. What do you wish we could all be thinking about and acting towards in this nexus between climate and peace?
Well, Claudia, I'd like to start just by echoing what you said based on the comment by Mohamed from Somalia. There is an urgency to act. I'm literally just back now from northern Nigeria. I was there for a week, and really what I could see is because of the evaporation of Lake Chad, neighboring Lake Chad, we have to dig ever deeper into very dry land in order to reach underground water tables and pump water, be it for drinking or for irrigation meant for agriculture. And this affects not only the northeast of Nigeria, but also neighboring Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, where you have armed conflict ongoing now. So I cannot, overstate what you just said about the urgency of reacting and acting now. It's a great pleasure to be participating in this second conference on environmental peacebuilding. The conversation is highly topical, it's timely. And I'd like to thank you for your kind words of introduction, and also Your Excellency Michel Jarraud. So as Alexis was saying, it's precisely in countries where you have protracted conflict that people are the most at risk of being impacted by climate change. I just looked at the index produced by Notre Dame University called the Global Adaptation Index. And actually, when you look at the 25 most vulnerable countries in terms of climate change impact, 14 of them, over half of them, are just now in protracted conflict. And it's precisely there where institutions are least equipped to mediate the tensions caused by increasing stress on scarce resources, and to find and finance solutions that support people, coping mechanisms, resilience, and adaptation. So what I hear from our colleagues at the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they witness this in so many war-torn countries, it's communities on the front line who say that their main concerns now, a very big concern for them, is climate shocks. That becomes an urgent issue because it adds to the issues that the humanitarian consequences of the conflict, and puts their coping mechanisms to stress and to the limits. So in sum, it's this convergence of climate risk, environmental degradation, and protracted conflict that really threatens people's means of survival. It affects their health, it affects their food insecurity, it affects the water stress, and this is something that must be addressed. When I was listening to Alexis, I thought, to say a word on climate security. We speak a lot of climate security, and I see a dangerous trend to securitize climate change impacts by seeking to contain what are the impact in terms of displacement of population, sometimes through hard security measures, military means. And as Alexis was saying, the academic community broadly, we agree that there is no direct causal link that climate change causes in itself conflict. But of course, it does indirectly increases the risk of conflict when it exacerbates tensions and stress factors. And our response must go much beyond security responses. We should instead invest in reducing vulnerability to the climate shocks. And for the time being, what I see is that climate action and climate finance is extremely low in fragile and conflict-affected countries. And we must change that. In addition, the few measures that are being taken and financed for adaptation and resilience, they must also be more conflict sensitive. So what to do? I think the first thing is a bit obvious, but it's really to mobilize for greater compliance with the laws of armed conflict, in armed conflict, which is international humanitarian law. You have a whole range of provisions that protect the environment and essential and vital infrastructure, be it, you can think of the prohibition to attack and burn oil wells, which contribute to CO2 emissions and environmental damages of very largely. So we have published very recently an updated guidelines on the protection of the natural environment in armed conflict, where we provided very practical recommendations to states. For example, by prohibiting attacks on civilian infrastructure and property, such as agricultural land, forest, and drinking water installations, or we can also designate biological diversity hotspots as demilitarized zones during our conflicts. In terms of trying to redress imbalances in climate finance, I think that the vast majority of resources goes to stable middle-income countries, and we need to have a bit more adaptation funding, especially to support and strengthen people's and institutional capacity to adapt to growing climate risks in armed conflicts. So it's a pretty bleak picture, but to conclude on a positive note, Claudia, I'd like to give you just a few examples of things we collectively do and have an impact. So just to give one example, from my own organization, we just launched last month, by the way, the ICRC Climate and Environment Transition Funds with two core objectives. First, it is to reduce our own CO2 emissions and environmental footprint by moving to greater energy efficiency in our own operations, which can also, by the way, generate substantial savings. So the fund will focus on shifting to solar energy in our highest fuel consuming sites across the world. And it will help us, by the way, achieve our commitment to cut our own emissions by half until 2030 as compared to 2018. It's a big investment, but I think we have to start by ourselves if we want also to have a greater impact globally. Then we have also adapted our operations to help conflict-affected communities to withstand this combined impact of violence and climate shocks. For instance, across the Sahel, we have helped farmers and pastoralists to cope with the increasing variability in rainfall and longer periods of drought. For example, by supporting the rehabilitation of irrigation schemes and the production of animal feed together with silos to stock it, or drought-resistant seeds also that can be stored in community-managed silos. Another example, in Iraq, we try to alleviate water stress by rehabilitating water pumping plants and wastewater treatment plants, but also we restore and upgrade the piped network and the irrigation system to avoid losses, because anyway, water is in short supply. So instead of increasing the supply side response, we try to diminish demand by actually fixing the system, which is absolutely key. Some people say, oh, this is development work, it's beyond our capacity. But when we are the only, or when humanitarian organizations are the only one which have, the boots on the ground and can do the work, I think the question of wondering whether it is humanitarian development is not the key question. The question is, let's act and do it. So with these examples, I think I'd like to end by saying that we have to act collectively. We have launched a collective initiative called the Climate and Environmental Charter for humanitarian organizations. It has been signed now by over 200 organizations with the support of states, including the US, Norway, and Switzerland. And the two core elements are, first, step up our response to growing humanitarian needs and help people to find more resilient ways to deal with the impact of climate and environmental crisis. And second, maximize the environmental sustainability of our own work and reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions. So this is just to tell you that it is underway, but we need this collective mobilization, and I'm very glad also to see youth associated. What I saw in Nigeria, which I saw across the world where I've been, is that volunteers of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, young volunteers, are extremely sensitive to this topic, and they are mobilized. Over to you, Claudia.
Wonderful, Gilles, thank you for that. You have raised so many practical points that suddenly the nexus becomes very alive and very real. And so I wonder also to Gabrielle and the organizing team, we had Alexis, who had mentioned the water, peace, and security movement or organization that's doing some very great preventive work. Gilles, you have just listed off some excellent resources. And I think something that we can do, again, is to amplify, to a bit of shifting the narratives that it's all doom and gloom. In fact, work is being done. It exists. Nothing new needs to be invented. So let's just amplify these great resources that have received a lot of investment and deep thinking to have it make a difference in the lives of people. So yes, very good to see that there are great actions being done. As usual, ICRC as a leader in good practice. And so as organizations doing this work, how can we look inside our own houses to become more responsible actors in whatever we are doing? Your mention of conflict sensitivity is very important. Again, there are excellent guidelines and knowledge that exists. And so let's use it. Let's use it at all levels of our organizations. Let's use it in our families. So I think there's something there about, becoming truly conflict sensitive and being accountable to, again, a lot of what we said. And then finally, this point on climate finance, I really appreciate that. And I know this is a political economist in you, seeing how they all fit together and how these decisions made here can actually make a difference. In Nigeria, Kabiru, thank you for your comments. And in, for example, Colombia, Uli, thank you as well. And we'll try to get back to these coming up shortly. And in fact, Uli, you're talking about biodiversity in places affected by conflict. And here we have, I'm so honored to be able to open the screen and microphone over to Professor Mark Hufty, who has, again, many decades of experience sort of on the front lines, thought leadership in this area. And we'd invite you to speak a little bit from this perspective, what has shifted over these years, and what practical advice for our younger participants today so that the same mistakes aren't repeated. So over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Merci, Claudia. Bonjour à tous. I think collective action is the question. No, Gilles, you mentioned collective action. I've been an observer of global environmental governance for many years as a political scientist and as a practitioner in development projects, etc. And first point, I think I'm in a short, I would like to talk about what we have learned and what we have done since 1972. Why 1972? Because this was the first global conference on the environment. And think about it, it was 50 years ago. So that's the first point. And It was a major moment in history, in Stockholm. There was this first conference, and as Michel Jarraud mentioned, it was a time of Cold War, but it was also a time of colonization. So in a sense, much tensions as we have now, and also much hope. And maybe I would say the side of hope is what is a bit missing now. I'll come to that, no? And it was also a global focus on resources. With the report of the Club of Rome, there was a general thought that we would exhaust our resources in some years, in 100 years' time. UNEP was created. At that time, there were no ministries of the environment in any country. And now we have ministries of the environment. There were also very few global conventions. We have plenty of them now. And much was decided at that time. For example, the principle of polluters pay, human rights and the environment, wildlife protection, pollution was mentioned by Alexis. And the climate wasn't addressed at that conference, but it was in some oil companies' research. It was being researched by these oil companies, and they knew, and they weren't telling the word. And later in '92, at Rio, the Earth Summit established many principles in '92, participation of NGOs, the link between environment and development, the conventions on climate, biodiversity, desertification, the question of forests, and another very important principle, the precautionary principle. Question is, what do we have now? And what is the problem of global environmental governance? We have multiple agencies and organizations, but it's all fragmented. That is, there's no global coordination regarding climate or biodiversity, as was mentioned. It's spread all over, and we have multiple conventions, treaties. The law is there, the practice is not there. We still have a very huge problem, and the problem got bigger as the UN system became weaker. And even if some private companies got more involved into global environmental governance, it's not stronger for that. We know something. We are touching the limits, the ecological boundaries of the planet. But global environmental governance is, well, I think it is a failure. We have made tremendous progress in many areas. We have done so much, but we are unable to stop or reorient the machine. And we still have inequalities, power questions, selfishness, and we're still in a period of conflict. We thought with the end of the Cold War, this was going to be better times, but we're still in it. We're stuck with that. So I don't know. I have no lessons to make. I was still an irresponsible teenager in '72, and I've seen it going and going and going, and people not listening to each other. I think we need to listen to each other, And well, you're asking the young generation. I think I'm still young, but obviously not in age, but in my mind. What shall we do? Well, problem is we are training people. We, look at the Institute, for example, we're training very intelligent, very fine people. But what will they do? They will enter into these conventions, organizations, institutions, and they have no choice but perpetuate this very same system. So we need a radical change. Where will it come from? Is the question.
Mark, what a wonderful way to leave us pondering. And Gabrielle, I note that our time is up for our 30 minutes. I had dreamed of having the three experts here speaking with each other in our time, but we will have the more interactive session after this second part, because you have raised some crucial points here. I would say that it is not inevitable that we will perpetuate what is happening, and it is a radical move that is required. And I do believe that, you know, with the 90 of us who are here today, I think that's already something radical that can start. So thank you, Professor Hufti, for those tremendous comments with a perspective, 5 decades worth of knowledge and practice to really, with great legitimacy, tell us that our current global environment governance system needs urgent attention. So thank you for that. This is the Environmental Peacebuilding Conference. And so if we're talking about collective action and listening to each other, indeed, there is a role for peace builders to play in all of this. So thank you, the three of you, for being part of this. For those of you who are participating and putting chats in, I am reading and I'm going to bring them back in at the last session. So Mark, Alexis, Gilles, I thank you so much for your truly moving, inspiring insights, and I look forward to seeing you and all of our participants again very soon. Mr. Jarraud, I am pleased to turn the screen back over to you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Claudia, for this very interesting part one, and thanks to the three panelists for bringing a lot of information on the connection and their own perspective. Now, I was asked to deal with the second part, which is looking forward. How can, and initially it was phrased, how can climate change be used as an opportunity? And I didn't feel comfortable with that. So I felt maybe the action against climate change, because to look at climate change as an opportunity is could be very, very misleading. So I felt it's better to look at it the fight, the action against climate change. Now, the way I would like to organize it is to build on the previous session and to ask each of the three panelists, and I can see they are all now online. So welcome and welcome to all three of you. And I would like to ask maybe 2 questions, but I will ask 1 question to the three of you, and I would like each of you to provide comments on the first question. I will ask a second question, and I would like you to get your perspective on the second question. So my first question is, can the actions for fighting climate change, and I'm thinking, of course, you can think of all the action, including mitigation, but when we listen to the previous session, we are mostly talking about action in terms of adaptation. And we saw that in many respects, the recent crises, be they the health crisis with the pandemic, the climate crisis, the refugee crisis, often led to an increase in the nationalistic approach in my country first, my interests first. So a decrease in the solidarity. So I would like to go back and to see from you whether there is, we can be optimistic that some of the action can be against that. So how can it help to build a more peaceful future? Can some of this action be used as really opportunities for cooperation, but also cooperation has to be built on trust. So for building trust amongst partners. And last not least from my perspective, it has been one of my obsessions. How can we inject also the need for a longer term perspective, not look only at issues with a very short term perspective. I solve only the top priorities, but how can we have a longer term perspective? So maybe I said I would go in in the order of the thing first, and then for the second question, reverse order. So Jan Kerel, maybe to you to be the first to.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that interesting question. I think most of my colleagues in here, including from the first panel, are technical people. So I will try to make it more personal in a perspective of young people coming from one of the poorest region in the Philippines. So I think first is I want to give insights or opinion in terms of peace. I see it in the context of both intrinsic and extrinsic ways. So intrinsic means my own peace and security as a normal citizen, and my safety and my children's safe existence in the next coming years because of this climate crisis. And if I will have food security, livelihood, shelter, and all of those basic things that we need as a human being. And in terms of extrinsic context, of course, the typical multilateral or peace among other nations. So with your questions on how can we build more peaceful future? I think one of the things that I observe as a normal citizen is most of this disruption in peace is brought to us by it's fueled by economic interest. It's fueled by greed, by individualistic perspective. And I think Professor Michelle, you mentioned about pandemic. It taught us a very hard lesson that no country can survive on its own. So similarly, in this climate crisis, I think our colleagues in the previous session have mentioned that there's a lot of policies in place, there's a lot of convention, but why is it that there's no action being seen or to really address this crisis? So I think how we can build a more peaceful future is to go back to our values, to go back to our shared goals and coexistence. Because if we understand that we are sharing the same atmosphere, we live in the same atmosphere, we drink the same water, and we breathe the same air. It's not anymore about me being Filipino or our colleagues being a different nationality. So if we have to go back to this very basic idea of values and shared goals, I think even if there's no Paris Agreement, even if we already have this actions, like we have this Paris Agreement, we have the Glasgow Pact for last year, and right now, as you can see in my background, I'm working for the Water and Climate Coalition. We are trying to build a cooperation. We are trying to build trust among different nations, and we are trying to agree here that, for example, the water in the countries near the Himalayas, they are very dependent on the water in the cryosphere. It's not renewable. So they are now cooperating. It's basically now building trust among each other that we really have to resolve this. And it's a sign of peace and cooperation. So I see it in that perspective, that people are more receptive now towards this issue, because they understand that this is not anymore me in an individualistic perspective. This is about us together as one global citizen. So I think that's it for me, Professor Michelle.
Thank you very much. Very, very insightful. Maybe if I can turn to you, Maria Paloma. Same question, but with your own perspective.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much again for inviting me to this panel. So you asked us if the actions for fighting climate change can help to build a more peaceful future. And for me, the short answer is yes. So there's an increasing amount of research and projects, as other panelists such as Monsieur Carboniere have mentioned. And these initiatives can be grouped into two main categories, which are like climate resilience, peace building, and conflict sensitive climate change policies. So both are based in the assumptions that peace and sustainability are becoming mutually dependent. So for climate resilience, peace building, it mainly focuses on making sure that climate change is not endangering peace building, but also climate change as a catalyst for dialogue and peaceful conflict resolution. On the other hand, conflict-sensitive adaptation, mitigation, and other climate change policies refer to programs that take conflict risks into account, but that can also take a step further and use the climate change action to build trust, to build relationships among communities, for example, through ecosystem restoration or through adapting together to climate change, also as other panelists have mentioned. So to make this a reality, we need an increased awareness and recognition of this nexus that also Claudia had mentioned before. And because I'm now UN staff, I'm going to talk about the UN system, even though Professor Hafti mentioned it has a lot of limitations, but I think it's still important because it gives a signal to the international community at large and encourages action at the national, subnational, civil society, private sector levels, and also allows to put this longer term perspective, as Monsieur Jarreau just mentioned. So I am surprised that this topic is still not, as visible as it should be in the UN system, but I think it's increasingly talked about. In the UNFCCC, the awareness, I think, is still in the very early stages. So, for example, in the COP last year, that was also just mentioned, there was no mention of the climate peace or climate conflict nexus in the World Leader Summit or the high-level segment where, heads of state and government, heads of international agencies, and other important figures spoke. There was only one event on the climate peace nexus out of hundreds, really hundreds of events. This was just a side event, which was very interesting on integrating climate change, women, peace, and security agendas. But there's still much more work to do. In the broader UN system, awareness is a little bit higher. In the General Assembly last year, the conflict climate link was mentioned by a few countries in their speeches by heads of governments and state. Also, others made reference to the impacts of migration or food security, for example. The topic is increasingly present, for example, in the UNEP Crisis Management Branch that has participated also in this conference, the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and the Security Council, but this hasn't borne enough results yet. So just December last year, a draft resolution was presented to the UN Security Council on climate change and peace, but it was not passed with two votes against, which was India and the Russian Federation. So there was a veto and one abstention of China. So basically, this means that countries are still not ready to take up this challenge at the core of the UN system. So what is next for us? Us as UN staff, as professors, but also as civil society in general, is to raise awareness, in our communities, in our levels, in our agencies, and shifting funds and attention to these types of approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Lujala, now it's, if I can ask you the same question. So what would be your perspective on it?
Thank you. Thank you for posing this very important question. And during these past 3-4 days, I have attended several sessions at this conference in which the potential for peace in the context of climate change has been discussed. And many of these discussions have evoked precisely the same things that have been mentioned by Jan and Maria and the others earlier in this panel, that there are opportunities, and these opportunities, among others, come through mainstreaming human-based participation and inclusion of people and communities, introducing intersectionality, and in short, contextualizing our projects and approaches and programs better in this context. And also, I would say that often these adaptation measures, they do focus on addressing people's basic needs and development needs in a sustainable manner. And when this is done successfully, they contribute to socioeconomic development and increased equality. And thus they are very directly addressing two key drivers of armed conflict. And I also think that another type of potential in this context and the opportunity for us is materializing through the breaking down the silos between the different stakeholders and also across multiple scales. So there are many ways I can see that the climate change efforts actually can combat and provide opportunities for peace and conflict prevention. Earlier today, I attended a very excellent session called Climate Change, Conflict and Peace, where the presenters looked at how climate change can potentially tip into virtuous cycle instead of vicious cycle. And I would strongly recommend all of you to watch this session. I don't think it's yet at the YouTube, but when it comes there, I strongly recommend to look at that session. It was an excellent one. Taking up one example of kind of the narratives that portrayed scarcity at the time as a driver for conflict was the scenario that was put forward in 1990s that said that the future wars would be fought over water. And we now know that it didn't happen. And one reason for this, I think, was that water is such an essential resource, like Jan was saying, that in most occasions, people and countries will actually rather cooperate to secure access to it rather than fight over it. And in fact, the water research and advocacy has come around and now focus more on the water diplomacy and peace than conflict. And echoing Jan here, I think and I hope that climate change will trigger something similar. The climate change and environmental changes in general have become to be such an existential global crisis that they can only be fought if we do it together. So we need to join forces and we need to be united. We need to cooperate. We need to show solidarity across regions, across countries and within countries. And all these efforts will reduce the risks of tension and conflict. And then perhaps the question is more about how to do it. How can we break these cycles of mistrust and grievances? And I think here we have a lot to learn from, not only for the water diplomacy, but also from other environmental peace-building approaches. And just to end my remark here, I would like to point out, highlight one more thing. And but although climate change can indeed provide entry points to settling existing disputes and preventing new ones, and also provides opportunities to environmental peace building as a field. But equally importantly, I think it's important to realize, and that's what the first part of this panel was about, that environmental change has not itself hasn't been a major driver of human violence, at least not yet. And because luckily most of the humankind still lives in the peace, also in circumstances that are very, very difficult and even deteriorating. And in order to prevent conflict, we need to focus on the conflict drivers, the socioeconomic development, the governance, the state capability and stability, the different types of inequalities and perhaps ethnical polarization. So we need to address those first in a given place or even in a given country. And only after that, when we have addressed these, the projects that more directly try to address climate change impacts or mitigate it, for example, by putting windmill parks or green metal mining sites in different places, only then those can be more successful and further promote prosperity. Also, it will help them to be accepted by the local communities that will get them in their backyards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I will go straight to my second question. You all come, the three of you come from different parts of the world. You have very different professional, personal experience with respect to that. And my question would be, from your own personal experience and perspective, do you have examples you would like to share? Actually, in your previous question, some of you shared already some example, but do you have other examples you would like to share to inspire action and cooperation? But a very specific point I would like you to touch upon is that there is a huge gap between generations. And this huge gap, the generation which is making decision is usually the older generation. There are a few exceptions, but it's mostly the older generation. And the generation which will be affected most and who will have to make decisions later is the younger generation. How do you see the role and the contribution of the young generation? How can we bridge this gap between generation? It's a very, when I was the Secretary of WMO, we really struggle with that question. It is not an easy question. And at the level of the United Nations, it's not an easy question either. So maybe, Professor Lujala, I said I would go in reverse order. So do you want to start with this question?
Sure. And I would say that it's essential that we have both the youth and the older generations, or what we want to call it. I come back to that. First, the youth, as you said, they present the future. They present the innovation, and they also present the urgency. And they do challenge the established ways of doing things. And they also, what I really think is important here is they unite people across so many different types of borders, and which of country borders is only one then. Well, then the older generation, they do present the established way of doing, often rigid, but often also pragmatic. And they can learn us about the obstacles, the hard realities, the need to go slowly even when your house is burning. For example, have you ever heard about not taking the elevator when your house is burning? And they also have the knowledge of the hard trade-offs that need to be made and also accepted. And I do think it's wise to listen to these experiences and learn from them, and then go and challenge them. And just a short note on this, at the same time, I'm a bit wary of creating new splits to us and others. And in this case, it being the age of the generation, because if you look at studies on climate change perceptions and attitudes toward mitigation adaptation, you will see that age is only one factor, often insignificant factor when it comes to these attitudes. Much more important at educational levels, the previous experiences, the worldviews, the values, the political leaning, and things like that. So my question would be that, is there really a generational gap, or is it something else that we are talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Maria Paloma, you can take it from there and bring your own perspective.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so from my own experience, I would like to speak actually of how young leaders and young people can make an impact on climate change and peace from international organizations and processes. So I do think that youth is increasingly present in organizations at all levels. For example, there are many youth organizations that are accredited to the UN and other international organizations, and that participate actively in plenaries, in events. They intervene in negotiations. They provide input. For example, in the UNFCCC, there's many topics that are open for inputs by youth. There's also the Conference of Youth, for example. There are many sort of UN models, but with young people that around the world can provide solutions to major issues under discussion by the formal processes. Youth movements outside the formal processes are also extremely important. We all know about, the Fridays for Future movement, how it has gained visibility and really exerted pressure to accelerate progress at all levels, including at the multilateral arena, which have been referenced, Greta and this movement has been referenced by the UN Secretary General, heads of state and government, delegates, everyone. So it's really important. And they've also really I think since then or for a few years, a lot of reference of the priorities of young people and how it's important to, make this world a better place for future generations. And there's youth leaders that really foster action and implement action at every level, national, international, local. But I think probably Jean Carrel can speak more about this as he's, a young leader himself. But, there's also an increasing number, for example, of innovation initiatives, for example, the Earthshot Prize, that are really giving visibility of what young people are doing across the world. So, for example, in this instance, 3 out of the 5 projects that won were led by young people, and it really, provided visibility and funds to these very new ideas that they're doing to, provide green energy, clean, restore coral reefs and all this. There's also an increasing number of young country delegates in the international negotiations. I'm going to speak about UNFCCC. For example, the average age of the Panama delegation in COP26 was 29 years old. And really across the board, these young delegates are pushing for ambitious and robust solutions. So they're talking about, including human rights and gender considerations, really, pushing for the highest standards for environmental integrity, for example, in carbon markets, raising ambition for mitigation and finance, So I think it's really important that there's a youth voice also from the official negotiators' side. And inside international organizations as well, there's young staff like me that there's many, programs to include young people. And it's been my experience that everyone is really open to listening to the young members of teams, from program officers, directors, even heads of agencies. They are really, listening to young people. The UN Secretary General has surrounded himself with a lot of young people to hear their ideas. And I think, many of us are making a difference within or trying to, although the change is, slower than needed. But all in all, I think that spaces are there. Young people can make a difference. And what we need now is for young leaders to push for environmental peace building approaches that really consider peace and sustainability holistically, using these international spaces and really having their voice heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this perspective. Jan Kerel, now to you. You went through a super typhoon in Philippines. It happens that at the time I interacted a lot with the Philippine authorities at the time when I was Secretary General of WMO, and the effect of this typhoon was made worse because it happens that it was because of the storm surge, the water flooding the coast. And it happens that Philippines is one of the unlucky country where the sea level rise is one of the fastest in the world over all the ocean. Now, from your experience in that, Jan Kerel, I'm sure you have lots of things you would like to share with us. So can you do it in a concise way and a very sharp way?
I will try to do that, Professor Michelle. So I think I would like to pick up 2 questions that in this session. You mentioned, Professor Michelle, it's a hard question, even in the UN system, okay? And then there's another one from Professor Mark. He was saying, we need a radical change. Where will it come from? My answer is, it will come from the young people. Why? The reason why these leaders are still in power is because we vote them. And these same leaders are the one creating our own rules, our own system. And this is basically the major bottleneck why action is being hindered to implement what is needed to address this crisis. I mean, all the scientific organizations, institutions are proposed as many solutions, but nothing is happening. So in terms of my own experience and perspective, as both a survivor of Typhoon Haiyan, at the same time former young leader, I was a legislator at the age of 18 in the Philippines. So the right combination here is perhaps, a combination of good policy, a resource for young people, at the same time technical support. Because if we push young people to be the agents or to be the catalyst for change, we need these three combinations for us to really move forward. For example, in the Philippine Constitution, we have a very, very unique system where young people can hold the position. From the village, we have the smallest local government unit is the barangay or the village, and we have the city or municipality, and we have the state and the national level. So every level we have young representatives. About hearing them, they're actually they can propose their own bill, they can propose their own projects, programs, and activities. So this is, I think, what other countries needs to implement, that hearing them or listening to them in a podium is already a thing in the past 5 to 10 years. So we need to step up, because listening to them without doing something or empowering them is actually just you're just writing a text in an invisible board. So right now in the Philippines, we have this for, I think, for the past 25 years already. So if for young people, I think how we can close the gap with the older generation is awareness. If the young people is aware of what is the existing problem, and we have mutual understanding between this older generation, we will have the same footing. It means that, for example, in a more practical example, in Leyte, my province, where Typhoon Haiyan hit, we are the major generator of high geothermal energy, but it doesn't mean that we have the cheapest electricity. So it means that even if we have the solution already to address the climate crisis, it doesn't translate for us poor Filipinos. You see? So again, we close the gap with older generation by creating a system, creating subsidies, funding, creating systems where young people can appreciate that this government or this political system is really working towards sustainable future. And we can, of course, understand that change can only be attained if there is a collaboration between the people, the government, and the private sector. There's always this wrong notion where we're only crying for the government to do it or crying for the businesses to do it, but it doesn't happen in that way. We should have a collaborative effort between the people, because when there is a demand from the people of a certain product, there's a supply, and the government, of course, needs taxes to operate. So you see the link towards these three different sectors. So I think that's it for me, Professor Michelle. It needs these three combinations, the policy, the resource activation, and then technical support to enable for us to close this gap and really young people to contribute to this dilemma.
Thank you very much. So now I don't want to take more time from Claudia. I will hand over to you, because now there is time for interaction between the panelists, and do whatever you think is important. But before I hand over to you, I want to thank the three of you, because in this context where there are many negative news about climate change, the lack of action, that the things are happening too slowly, I'm really grateful that you inject this perspective that things can be done, that there can be positive action. And so I think that was a very important message. So thank you to the three of you. And maybe Claudia, I now hand over to you.
Wonderful, Michelle. Thank you. And thank you all for another fascinating series of reflections. I hope we can continue this forward. We have 16 minutes left in this session, unless I hear from our organizers that we have a little bit more time. So that is a little bit of time for bringing all of the panelists back onto the screen on mic. If you could join us We'd really like to have you here. The way that your different interventions have spoken to each other are really resonant, as well as with the comments and the feedback that we've been receiving in the chat and the question and answer. What I'd like to propose is that I just highlight a few of the points that came up in a way that tries to weave them together. And then I would ask each of you to sort of speak based on what you've heard, because once we have the whole, it's often much more satisfying to speak to, because when we're going to end here today, what are the key messages that we want everyone who is here to go home with? I see, Gabriel, we have 5 more. We can go until 16:35, so this is excellent news. Thank you, Gabriel, for giving us this. So to our panelists, a few points, and then it's going to be up to you to answer which of them resonates most with you. From Paulin Reynard, we have 2 very interesting comments. One is about Haiti as a case, as an example, and some of you who have worked with the UN and with other powerful international development and aid organizations know that it is a case that is really being affected now by drought, by water shortages, by climate catastrophes. And yet, how many decades and billions have been invested in Haiti? So where were the missed opportunities? Let's be honest here. And does the system just not work to be able to address these? And Pauline has another second excellent point. So go ahead and read Pauline's comments. To be careful about idealizing young people, right? So we are clearly breaking down, and I think Gabriel, you and co-organizers have indeed shattered the divisions between us oldies and you youngies. We are working together, and I think what I'm realizing is that we don't need everyone to jump on board. We just need like the 10% to be leading the way. And so for those of us who are leaders who are working on this together, I do believe that even an event like this is about bridging these different generations. The point as well about different media, what are the narratives that we are perpetuating? And if young people are listening to one type of media and others are listening to another, there needs to be something about the communication and the narratives around all this that needs to be addressed. Professor Luyaya, you and Professor Hufti, both of you really sort of brought this collective action question to the fore. So how are we going to do it now? Professor Carboniere, you did a bit the same. We need to do this all together. So concretely, what does this mean? Because we have Prakash Lama, who has said a lot of this just sounds like a dream, more words, more of this. What does it actually take to make this happen? And Prakash, I would invite you, because I think often we are more experts than the experts invited. I think we know what the answer to that is. So what will each of us do, Prakash, in doing this? So I think we can each pose ourselves this question. And then 2 last points, actually 3 last points. Jan and Maria Paloma, you spoke again about this importance of values and trust and shared understanding. So again, we see how important this peace building perspective is when we're trying to tackle these urgencies that are coming in. And the interconnections, not just between people, government, and private sector, but between them across at a global perspective. So, we're all connecting. So it's not just, within each country, but seeing it as an interconnected global whole. So that comes out of all of your interventions really quite beautifully. Kabiru, thank you for recalling history, colonial governance era practices. And if we want to know why people are so reticent to believe states that were often very violent and repressive, if that sort of mixes in and comes back to Gilles' earlier point about securitization of the climate agenda, we need to be careful, but we also need to understand where that reticence comes from and where that distrust comes from, and to speak about it because history remains present. And then finally, Dalia, you wanted to know about the Anthropocene label value in all of this work. So who among us would be the brave panelist expert to go first? I invite you. Does anyone just want to raise your hand, and then I turn over the mic and screen to you? I see some smiles. Thank you, Gilles. I was hoping. Thank you so much. Over to you, Professor Carboniere.
Yes, Claudia, you referred to Haiti, and Haiti, as we know, has been, the kind of the epitomizing the failure of the international aid community to do anything good to rebuild back better, let alone building forward differently and better. So just if I look a bit at some of the failure in Haiti and the situation now today, I will take one conclusion, which is very broad, actually, is that we have to work and to put the communities and the people and youth at the center of the efforts that we implement on the ground, and not come with our solutions. I've been struck by a PhD carried out in Peru years ago, and maybe Marc Ufti was also involved. And the researcher found out that adaptation program funded by the North is a way, if you wish, to say, okay, we did emit all these CO2 in the air, but we will now fund some of the adaptation in the driest land of Peru. And actually, the way it was implemented on the ground was saying to the farmers, your practices are unsustainable, and you have to change the way you do farming. So that was, we were walking on the head, and it's the world is upside down. It's not at all the way to approach it. The way to approach it is to work with them. And I was thinking, looking at this famous image of the border between Dominican Republic and Haiti, where you see the Dominican Republic full of trees, forests, and as soon as you get to the border, it's bared land with a lot of muds, sliding and creating a lot of hazards also for the people. So it's institutions that must be built, but with the communities, and to give them that they devise their own ways of seeing how they can build such measures as to go towards reforestation, towards trying to take care of the communities and empowering them to do so. And I think it's hugely challenging, because now, unfortunately, we are back in Haiti, and we have to deal with youth groups that are extremely destabilizing factor in terms of access to health and access to essential services. Can we work with the communities and with them in order to provide them with a positive role and moving ahead? I think this will be a key to making it happen at local level. At the global level, I just mentioned one or two initiatives that we have launched. And I think let's not wait for the international community of states to all agree for the perfect solution. Let's find ad hoc solutions with the multi-stakeholders, and let's move on with those who are ready to move on. And I'm sure that this will provide then assistance, because we have heard about blockages at the UN Security Council and elsewhere. And I think if we just wait for these blockages to go away, we are losing too much time and energy. So this is maybe my conclusion.
Wonderful, Gilles. That's perfect. Very, very practical. Maria Paloma, would you like to add further to this?
Yeah, thank you. No, I completely agree with what Monsieur Carboniere just said. My comment was exactly in the same direction. I think, some of us are involved in the international and multilateral negotiations and so on, and we're pushing from there. But I would tell everyone not to wait. So how to make the dream into a reality? Just do something for yourself, right? And we don't really need to wait until there's these big initiatives. You can just do it at your community level. Do you know there's any sustainability project in your community, in your neighborhood? Do you know if they're taking into account how to also solve maybe some local violence? Can you implement that? The other way around, do you know any initiatives that are about security? Can they be made sustainable? Are they going to work, with the consequences of climate change in 10 years? There's many things that each of us can do, and also for young leaders. Of course, we know about Greta, we know about all these, big figures, but we can all be leaders in our communities as well, right? If you convince or, make awareness in the people around you in your university, at your workplace, there's a change you're also making. So I think, I agree completely that the solution is for each of us to put our little grain of sand and really, act in the ground. Thank you.
Wonderful, Maria Paloma. Thank you. One drop at a time. That's wonderful. Who would like to go next? Mark, thank you. And then Alexis.
Okay, very briefly. I don't think being young is a virtue by itself. There are many young people just doing nothing or consuming, having the biggest car they can, or traveling, or doing nothing basically. So you have to have a project. And where are the projects now? Who's doing something? I'm not sure that by getting in the power system, even in the UN or the best design organizations, is the way to do it. One alternative way is, and as we can see it, are social movements, young people in the streets, and not within the power system that is in place, maybe.
Thank you, Mark. A call to courage. Alexis?
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the point mentioned about idealizing youth. I think that it's important that that to know that the youth needs in space to connect, for example, with professionals with a lot of years of experience. For example, I really agree with the comment of Professor Lujala that we need to be interconnected in order to go farther and faster. And then also, I would like to say that it's important to give, to create more opportunities for young people that are in the front lines, for example. Of course, there are many opportunities, of course, within our countries, but unfortunately, sometimes we only are close to our borders, and we cannot, for example, raise our voices in international spaces because of the barriers of language, because of the barrier of, for example, experience. And then I saw that in many international conferences, for example, where young people are invited, but not all of them can speak English, for example, or not always is translation is available. So I think we are losing a lot of power of young people in the front lines, that they have so much knowledge, but it's only these kind of structures that avoid them to be part of the decision making. So I think there are a lot of work to do there. And I can say that as a Peruvian, I'm not from Germany, I'm from Peru, living in Germany. I can say that I have a lot of, and I think that I'm in a privileged position because I can speak English, but I know many other young people doing amazing things around the world that maybe cannot be in some positions because of these barriers. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's really important to, between young, try to push them and give them the opportunity to be in different positions, try to create this network and help them to be there and to speak and to share their experience.
Thank you, Alexis. Also extremely practical, feasible indeed. Professor Lujala, the floor is yours.
I just wanted to echo Alexis and others here, this about the barriers and giving resources to people that would like to make a difference but are not able to do it because they are, it can be language barriers, it can be knowledge barriers, it can be resources not able to join events like we are having this week because the internet is not functioning, or they cannot travel to Geneva, which is awfully expensive city. So this is something that we have to try to find solutions to. But also I think and what is important is education. So we have to mainstream these issues in education everywhere, not only in Norway, where I live now, or Finland, but every country, and we have to do it accessible, and we have to do it in a convincing way, so that we can educate even better the coming generations. And if we need to, we have to go and approach people where they are. If it's Snapchat or TikTok, so that's where we should be if we want to reach to the certain age groups or people with certain profile. And then other people we have to reach through other media. So I think there is no really one solution that fits everywhere. Every context is different, and like voting, and like was said that, okay, voting, if you vote, perhaps you should always vote a female and person that is younger than you. But that only functions in countries where voting is a viable way of changing how things are done. And so with these words, well, I let the floor to others.
Wonderful, Manuela. Thank you. Also very interesting approaches here. So we have two more last interventions. Michelle, would you like to go before Jan has his closing words? Can we take your mic on, please?
Jan can go first, and then I can make a little comment, a short one afterwards.
I'm interested with the conversations here with my colleagues. Basically, I mean, I both agree and disagree on what Professor Mark mentioned, that you know, some young people are taking the streets but doing nothing. I really agree on that. But again, saying that coming into the system is not an answer. Again, perhaps I think as leaders, it is our responsibility to educate them. And for me, as a young person, I am 28 years old, joining a UN agency. And my always mantra is, if you cannot beat them, join them. And what we are trying to do here in the World Meteorological Organization is basically creating a system where young people can turn this clamor, these cries, into a tangible set of plans and actions where we can collaborate with the UN system, with the different governments. Like, hey, look, we are not just taking the streets and telling them this is what we want, but we are proposing to you tangible, measured, evidence-based plan and a development plan and agenda. So this is what we're trying to do right now, co-creating with young people, not just listening to them, but involving them on how we can create a tangible set of actions, because it is us that will inherit this planet. So your decisions now may not be suitable for us in the future. So that's why it's important to have this inclusivity context. And in fact, our colleagues here mentioned earlier that we have this Rio conference. The Rio conference is the same convention that gave us the mandate that civil society organizations should be involved in these conversations. So I think we should consider that young people is not only a key, how to say this, it's not about just involving them, but it's actually more of inclusivity. It's more of activating them, because we are now taking like a major chunk of the global population. So more than being voters, I think co-creating with them, providing them enabling mechanism is a key factor to make things work. So that's it.
Wonderful, Jan. Thank you very much. And Michelle.
Thank you, Claudia. I would like to come back briefly to Haiti, because it's a very both interesting, actually fascinating example. Indeed, I agree that it's overall it has been a failure of action to get things right. At the same time, it's one of the most difficult countries to do things. I was personally involved in Haiti on several occasions, just before the big earthquake, after the earthquake, trying to rebuild some early warning systems in Haiti. One of the challenges we get in countries like Haiti, and Haiti may be a bit extreme, is that it's very difficult to find to whom to talk to, because government officials are often not in charge of their department. It's you see, the beauty of being retired, maybe I'm less diplomatic than I would have been 10 years ago, but it's very difficult to do the right things if you don't have groups of people who have the authority to go with the change, to support the changes, to support the things. And the way I would phrase it is that for many decades in Haiti, what we, meaning the international community, not only the UN system, but there has been a lot of bilateral support to Haiti, we've been trying to build the roof of the house and the wall of the houses before being able to have foundations for the houses. So it has been a failure because we're trying to fix the problem without being able to fix the roots of the problem. That was typical. The earthquake, for example, I'll give you one example, which was the reason why I was involved. The big earthquake destroyed the building where the Met Service was working and issuing warnings for hurricanes. And so therefore, the earthquake was before the hurricane season, so there was nothing to provide any warning for the hurricane season. So help came, but it was totally organized from outside. So the key was to say, okay, let's build now a Met Service where the building can resist earthquake, where it can resist hurricanes, where it can resist floods. And I don't want to go into detail, but even that turned out to be a challenge much, much harder than I expected. And it was not an issue of money. It was not an issue of will to support. It was much more complicated. But it's very interesting to learn from that, because there are lessons which can help to be more effective for the future. So sorry to, again, every crisis can be used, back to the theme of this thing, as an opportunity. There are lessons to be learned, how to be more effective for the future. I want to remain optimistic about what we can do. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, Michel, for the gift of optimism, which I think is also our responsibility to take forward in very practical ways. To the panelists, to all of you, thank you. What insights, and I know there's probably going to be great note-taking that will have come out of this, and something out of this tremendous effort of the Environmental Peacebuilding team will really take this conversation forward. What I've heard, if we just want to do some tweetable bullet points, people at the center. Thank you, Gilles. We must not wait. It is now. Giving opportunities to young people who are on the front lines, and part of that is language. So again, bravo, organizers, for getting the translators in place. That takes work, I know. What privilege can we mobilize on our own parts to be sure that young people who are on the front lines are given the platform? What can we use in terms of who we hire, the amount of time and investment we make to be sure that these voices really do come to the fore? I think that's a responsibility that comes with our different levels of power and privilege that we should take very, very seriously as well, which relates a little bit to the point that was coming in on the chat from Tata and Anjanette, I think, about how do we get these different youth movements that are working in the world together. What a tsunami of power once we get the Luchas and the young Philippine activists working together. And I think, again, those of us with positions of power and privilege can do much more in facilitating that connection, and then let them go with that. And then finally, it is a collective story, and we have a lot of work to do, but let us do it together. So with that, I would be happy to close this session. I wish you all well, good health, and I look forward to continuing with you on this journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Claudia. Bye-bye.
Everyone, have a nice day.